Welcome to another episode of the Impossible Life Podcast. I'm your co-host, Nick Surface, and I'm looking across at a man who was recently fired by the NFL from his job as medical consultant. That's right, friends, the former Navy SEAL, Garrett Unkelbach, a man who doesn't believe in concussions and muscle tears, only mental weakness.
Man.
That one is 100% accurate. Like, that's probably the most real intro I've ever given.
Yeah.
So
Nick's getting at some of the ways I am. These guys on like concussion protocol for 3 weeks because of one hit. Come on, man.
So this is actually real because Garrett, in a nod to loving his wife and his wife's family, is playing fantasy football, which is not something that, if you know Garrett, that's not something that he would pick to do, and he's doing that, and so as a result, he has to be aware of some of these injuries. And
yeah,
so
I had a player who's a good receiver, Neighbors, who was out for 3 weeks with a concussion. Like, dude, what are you doing?
Right. And this cracked me up because then I started reading out more of the injuries to him, and he's just like, this is on a drive. We had 4 hours in the car back from the F1 race down in Austin, and Garrett's just going like, dude, these guys are so weak, as he recounts the time that he took a sledgehammer to the head and like just kept going, or had a paddle broken on his face.
I just want to go back to like the Nolan Ryan era of baseball.
Man. Yeah, man, what a stud Nolan Ryan was. But I think it's so funny because if you can imagine an injury report put in the hands of a Navy SEAL instructor, it'd be like, yeah, you got a concussion? Yeah, keep going. Oh, what? You broke your leg? Well, better not quit, otherwise you're out.
There was a guy at Team 3. He was a chief, and he was literally on a mission, got shot, and it was like, if you wear your plates correctly, they come right up to the top of your, right underneath your collarbone, because that is, your lungs come up almost to your collarbone. And so he had a bullet go right over his plates, right underneath his collarbone, get shot in the middle. He's the leader. Gets shot. He was fine, right? Didn't clip his lungs, just straight through and through. They patched him up. He kept going.
There you go. In the NFL, that would have been IR. Like, he would have been done for the season.
For the rest of the season, yeah. Everyone would have stood and moment of silence as he
and clapped for him as he showed up
off the field.
It is like, that amuses me no end. I think that's the most engagement you've ever shown on one of my intros. So today's episode is a win.
You got me with that one for
sure. Sometimes I got to make them true. So I'm really excited to get into this. We're doing a series. This is a special series, a 3-part series on parenting. Now, I know you may be thinking, oh, hey, look at you guys. You guys have raised absolutely 0 kids to full maturity. So what do you know about parenting?
I have a 4-year-old.
Yeah. So he's pretty adept.
Pretty much know what I'm doing.
Yeah, pretty much know everything. And my daughter's 11, and she's pretty awesome. So I can give lots of advice. That's not what we're here to do. What we're going to do is we're going to lay out some of the roles and the mindset.
Everything I know about parenting comes from having 2 really good ones.
There you go. Yeah, and having a wonderful wife to raise them. But we're going to go into God's idea for parenting. We're going to talk about the roles. We're going to talk about really what the mindset is of a parent and God's design, and some of the seasons of parenting and the different responsibilities. But what we're setting everything up for is an episode we've alluded to so much, which is we're going to have Garrett's parents on because they have 2 pretty great examples that show that they must have gotten something right. So I'm very much looking forward to having Scott and Darlene in. That's going to be good. That'll be part 3. And then next week, we're going to have a surprise guest who is a legit expert that will give us some insights that Garrett and I would not be qualified to give.
So we're going to do what we do on this episode and lay down some of the foundations, some of the basics, some of the systems, give you tools, things to think about. But then the next episode and the episode after that are going to be really some of more of the experience for this series.
Yeah, and parenting is just such a wide, like, if you're a parent, you have an opinion and you also have some experience. So it's such a wide topic because there's lots of people can get really argumentative about this. So to that point, really interesting. I didn't expect to get anything from this, but I was looking at some of the things around parenting. Fortunately, Pew Research does qualitative studies on everything. Qualitative meaning that it's more a matter of opinion rather than a quantity. So I'm not here to tell you a bunch of stats about single-parent homes or anything like that. Instead, they went out and asked a bunch of parents what their top concerns were, how hard parenting was, and if they think they're good parents. So check this out. 4 in 10 U.S. parents with children younger than 18 say they are extremely or very worried that their children might struggle with anxiety or depression at some point. In fact, the mental health concerns top their list of worries, followed by 35% who are similarly concerned that their child will be bullied. So parents are worried, my kid's going to get anxiety, My kid's going to get bullied. The reason I'm bringing these up is because we're going to get into some of the thought process behind this as your responsibility as a parent as to why some of those things I think are showing people's perhaps lack of understanding of their role as a parent. Now, when asked about their aspirations for their children when they reached adulthood, because, hey, you should be thinking about that, the parents prioritize two things: financial independence and career satisfaction. How American is that? Roughly 9 in 10.
Extremely American.
Yeah, I mean, it's so American. Hey, just be part of the system. Roughly 9 in 10 parents say it's extremely or very important to them that their children be financially independent when they are adults. And the same share say it's equally important that their children have jobs or careers they enjoy. And 4 in 10 say that it's important for them to go to college degree. Now, listen to this. The importance on them becoming parents. How many parents do you think actually want their kids to become parents? 20%.
Oh my gosh.
And only 21% want them to get married, according to this research. Now, but don't worry, G. They also think 62% of them say that being a parent has been at least somewhat harder than they expected, but 64% of them say they're doing an excellent or a very good job. Talk about giving your own performance review. Hey, 9 out of 10, give me a raise. 32% say they're doing a good job, which, quick math for you, that's 96%. Only 4% of people say they do a fair or poor job as a parent in this Pew Research study.
I'm doing, my kids don't want to have kids, and my kids have a jacked up definition of success, but I'm doing a great job.
Right, and I hope they don't get anxiety. Hey, give me an A. Like, honestly, if we were doing that
Oh my
great,
gosh, that's
like,
almost a joke.
but is that not? But that's why I thought those were so crazy.
It's terrible.
What this highlights to me, and like we're laughing because it's just that's the first time Garrett's heard those stats, and it is outrageous to give yourself a review. Anyways, that's a whole nother thing. But what that highlights to me is that we have a very low awareness of what it actually takes to be a successful, like what makes a parent successful. Right? Because if we had a bunch of great parents and they're producing amazing kids, I think our society would look a lot different than it does. And yet we've got 96% out there saying like, yeah, I'd say I'm doing a pretty great job. Like good up to excellent job. Okay, well, hey, I would say that the hardcore statistics don't back that up. So my question to you, if you're listening, is like, what makes a parent successful? And G, I'll pose that question to you. What do you think makes a parent successful?
I'll say two things I'm probably just going to steal some thunder from my parents because I know what they would say. Number one, my parents would say there's multiple parts of parenting. One of my parents' definitions for parenting success is that their children want to be with them.
Yeah.
Right. When your children grow up and they don't have to be with you, but they want to be with you. I know that for my parents, that's one of their definitions of parenting success. And I would say the other definition of parenting success is raising your children into maturity and development.
Right.
Right.
Good.
That they can go out and continue to reproduce, that they have children. Like scripture says that grandchildren are the crown of the aged ones.
Yeah. Very good. And we're going to get more into that. So that was a good little foreshadow. I didn't know how you were going to answer, but I think you did a pretty good job there. You don't need to review yourself.
Thank you.
I'll go ahead and give you a very good to
Nick
excellent
review there.
Yeah. Anyways, I don't feel like you meant that. All right, so here's what parenting is not, because as we just went over, there's perhaps some blind spots in society, and this is a tough one. And I'm, once again, just so you know, I'm not coming at this. I've got 3 kids. They're currently 11, 9, and 5. My kids are awesome. I give my wife a lot of credit, but we're very intentional about our parenting. By no means do I feel like I'm the expert, but I will tell you that I spend a lot of time thinking about how I parent. And before I had kids, because I didn't have kids till I was 31, I watched a lot of other parents to decide what I did and did not want to do. And so while everything I say has to be proven out, there's some things that I can say for a fact I've learned. And part of it is this: parenting is not for you. It's not for your enjoyment. It's not for your fulfillment. It's not for your dreams to come true. And it's also not for 18 years. I think that these are really common things that people have in there where they're like, oh, I've always wanted to have a kid. And, there was just things that I couldn't do that I really want to give to them. And it's like, that's a noble thought, but it you're still at the center of that.
It's still about you.
Right. And so
parenting is not about you.
Right. And that's where it can be very, very, very subtle. And so the mindset shift for those of us that are following Christ, and honestly, whether you follow God or not, I think this is where it gets really interesting, because if you don't follow God, like, where is your template, and how is your understanding of your role as a parent? It's 100% up to you to decide. And so Garrett has a saying. I want you to say the mindset, G, because this is your line.
Well, as we get into parenting here, I think one of the important shifts that I want this episode to be, in this series, to be a setup for, right? We talk about this all the time, that it's not about you. That's an important mindset shift. but also realizing that God gave you children, but those children do not belong to you. They belong to God. And I've heard great theologians say it before, and that's this thought that God has no grandchildren. God only has children.
I love that.
And so the children that you have, that you raise, they're not yours.
Right.
They belong to God. And so if like you don't own them, God gave them to you for you to steward them, for you to mature them. And like all the other things that God gives you, you're going to make an account for it. And so when you look at parenting this way, it's like my job is to do something with them. My job is not to have them. My job is to help develop them. That's a good setup for where we're going to go with the series.
Yeah, and I think that's so vital, though, because now you understand that you have a role to play that's defined not by you, but it's just like at your work. You don't get to show up and be like, yeah, today I feel like being over in this department. Tomorrow maybe I'll go to sales. It's like, no, you're going to go where you're told. I mean, we would never do that in a job, but I think a lot of times as parents, it's like people will flop around as to what they want to be, and we're going to get into that. But so the roles that we're going to cover, and we're going to give some more, we're going to dive into some of the responsibilities. But
what does it mean to be a parent?
Yeah, what does it mean to be a parent? Because it was kind of like, okay, what are the primary roles? So the 4 roles that we
it's
identified.
like some people, have a job that your spouse doesn't. They know your title, but they have no idea of what you do. Your title is parent. Let's get into actually some of the things that you do.
Right. Yeah, exactly. I see that you're head of growth here, but what does that actually mean?
What do you actually do?
Oh, okay. So
besides play golf.
Yeah. Well, hey, that's important for networking. Anyways, the roles of the parent, we defined it as 4, and we put it into steward, which I'm sure you could guess from Garrett's mindset shift, servant, leader, and friend. And we're going to go more into those. But I think one of the important things when you're looking at those roles is to understand there's seasons in parenting.
Those are the roles, right? Steward, servant, leader, and friend. And then the seasons of parenting. And I think this is one of the key challenges for parents. Again, I'm saying this really from watching my parents, hearing my parents talk about it, watching my parents live it, is navigating these seasons. So the first season for your children is protecting them.
Yeah.
When a baby is born, like it is your job to make it stay alive. Right.
That's for sure.
And that goes until a certain point of protection. Then, and it's a slow transition, and it's not like it's not an instant transition.
It's not like at 7, you
protection
stop.
goes away.
Right.
But you phase out of protection into maturing, and then you phase from maturing into elevating.
Right. And so this is, once again, you're like, well, how are you guys saying this? Well, fortunately, we have some great examples where we're at here in Frisco, Texas, particularly in your parents. They're the ones we're going to reference most, but also Pastor Keith has been a phenomenal reference for both of us. But I mean, I've watched this with your parents because you're like, okay, well, what is elevating? Because I know that there's people out there listening. Some of you don't have kids and you want to. Some of you are in the throes of kids that will have at various ages. And some of you you're like, well, my kids are grown, so this doesn't have anything for me. No, it does, because what I've watched your dad do with you in the elevating process, like you're fully grown. You've done things your dad's never going to do and never done as far as being a SEAL and some of the other stuff. But your dad is so for you. Like, I think it's amazing to, like, when we say elevating, I look at your dad at the stage he's in of life, and this is 100% where I plan on being when I'm his age with my kids. He's doing everything he can to push you and Britt up on his shoulders so that you guys will go way farther and advance the kingdom of God and grow into all the different things as far as legacy of godly heritage, far beyond what he's been able to walk out. And I think that is such a wonderful season, and I can't wait for him to be here so we can actually hear more about his thought process in there. And I particularly am looking forward to your dad coming in because if you listen to this podcast, or if you've ever been at any sort of public celebration, or really, heard Garrett speak on a Saturday morning at Mighty Men, I get hammered a lot by Garrett, and I'll be honest, I find it very amusing. So don't ever feel sorry for me, because I'm sure you can tell I probably do a lot to deserve it, and it's just part of our friendship.
And it's made you better.
Okay, that's. The problem I have with that is, as long as you really believe that, it just means like it's like your ministry to me. And anyways, and I'm okay with it. It is actually really funny, but it's part of our relationship. It's part of our banter. So it's typically one way. I'll take shots at G, of course, because it's fun, and I do take my shots. But the guy who has like pole position on hammering Garrett is his dad. And I said to Scott, I was like, man, I wish you could come hang out with us every podcast, because particularly at Legacy Navigators, which, by the way, we do still have spots available. It's going to be June of next year. You'll be with Garrett. You'll be with his dad. I'll be there. Phenomenal house. Father-son experience.
Get your deposit in now before prices go up.
Very true. Yeah, that's true. So if you want more information on that, just go to theimpossible.life. It's a father-son rite of passage trip. You go out, you learn land navigation in the place where the SEALs learn it, and you learn it from a Navy SEAL. The life application is what it's all about. It's not so much the land nav as much as it is the life application. So while we're on this trip, the reason I'm giving the background, we're driving places, right? And so me, Garrett, and Scott are in the front car, and there's a few vans of people behind us following us. And Garrett has a little bit of a heavy foot, you know. He's following the directive of his commanding officer who said drive with the gas, not the brake. And so as we're going, Scott just keeps getting into Garrett's ear. Going too fast, son. Slow down. Dad, I'm fine. If those guys wanted me to slow down, they would just slow down and I would see it and I would drop back. So this is going back and forth. Every time we're in the car, Scott's mentioning it.
That is the way like you drive in a military convoy, but it's okay.
Yeah, well, not everybody on that trip, and by not everybody, I mean the vast majority, we're not in the military. So anyways.
Kenny was, though.
Yeah, but dude, that's one guy, man. The other like 15 or 20, however many were there,
one
were
of
not.
the two drivers.
Okay. You see how he's still defending it. So anyway, so finally, and funnily enough, it was Kenny who dropped back, and he was the military guy. He eventually was like, this is too fast. And so we get back to the house, and everybody's like, where are they at? And we thought, did they get lost, whatever? And they're like, oh, he it gets back to Scott that he
It's actually not the story, but go ahead.
Dude, you can't just take it, can you?
Well, we didn't lose the group. They stayed with us, but the point remains. Continue.
Okay. Well, thank you for just listening to the story. Well, anyways, the feedback gets in there that Kenny didn't feel that the mile per hour that we were traveling the speed we were traveling was safe. Man, it was like somebody just poured some kerosene on Scott. And he was like, Garrett, I told you, man. And he just starts laying into him. And I'm just sitting there and I'm like, this is just such a great, like that was worth all the work and all the little sleep I got and all the fun things that we did. So that moment for me was just worth it, man. It was so funny. And I said to your dad, I said, I call him Pops. I'm like, Pops, I love having you around, watching you hammer Garrett. And he just goes, yeah, not too many people will do that to Garrett, but that's part of my responsibility. And I was just like, yes. So it was awesome. So that's just a fun story. Why did I tell that story? Mostly because I want to. So G, I'm looking forward to having your dad on, and it's just to say that yes, he still hammers you and he still corrects you, but he's very much elevating you.
He said, I don't have to do that very much anymore. But
I don't remember that part. I could tell some more stories.
It's because that's where our relationship is, right? Like he's one of the few people I take correction from.
Right.
And so because, I'm at a season of my life where my dad spent a lot of time maturing me.
Yeah, very much so.
So really one of the only things my dad can give me a hard time about is having a lead foot.
Or rental cars. Anyways, so we're going to go on to looking at each of these roles and some of the responsibilities. So very first one, G, and with each of these, there's like a little bit of an additional function for it. So the very first one was stewardship, right? It was steward. This is the coach role, and it comes from an understanding that your kids aren't yours.
Yeah. So think about this. Like I said, God has no grandchildren. So God gave his children to some of his other children to raise. And if you kind of just like really zoom out from God's, and look at it from God's perspective, we look at, there's like a big separation between us and our parents because of our age, but God doesn't see us that way.
Yeah,
right. God's not like, oh, your dad's so much older than you. To God, he doesn't see it that way. He just sees all of us as his children.
Yeah.
And if you think about the great example of stewardship is the parable of the talents, right? This is we reference this parable a lot here on this podcast, but parable of the talents, servant or master says he's going away on a long journey, leaves resources with each of his servants. And then the servants it doesn't belong to them what the servants have been given, but they have to do something with it and they have to make an account with it. And the first servant says that he was afraid, so he buried it in the ground and And then he said, I here, take what's yours. He basically didn't want the responsibility of it. And then the master says back to him, you wicked and lazy servant, you should have at least put it in the bank to give me interest.
Right.
Which obviously he didn't do. And it also implies that the other servants in the story didn't do that either. That the other servants in the story knew how to do something. They either bought land, they bought property, bought resources, bought a horse. I don't know. They did something.
Yeah, it says they traded. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, they did something with the money. So they knew how to use it to turn it into more. And so see yourself as a parent, right? Like you're the servant and your children are a form of money that God gave you, right? You're supposed to turn it into more.
That's very good.
He was upset with the servant who said, well, I just didn't want to lose it.
Right.
Right. And many parents get stuck in this. This is the protection, right? There's a season of your children's life where your job is to protect them, right? But if you look at your child like a seed, many parents, like, to protect that seed, you can keep it in your hand. But when it's time to mature that seed, you have to put it in the ground.
Yeah.
And there's a transition there that parents have to focus more on. I have to turn this into something. And so this is one of the roles of the parent, that you have to be a steward. Your job is to develop your children into something,
Very good.
not to just keep them safe.
Yeah.
And this is Proverbs 22:6.
22:5 or 6. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
Go ahead, read it.
It says, start children off on the way they should go, and even when they're old, they'll not turn from it.
Right. So one of the things you're responsible for stewarding is helping your children have direction in life, helping your children have a relationship with God, right? Raise up a child in the way they should go. This is one of the scriptures that is direct instruction to parents.
Yeah.
Right? Give them a direction. Help them know where to go. Develop your children to actually be able to produce something on the earth.
Yeah. That speaks to skills. It speaks to raising them to love God and to have those values. And I mean, it's Deuteronomy 6, 5 through 9. It says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. We've all heard that one. But it's, these commandments that I give you today are to be on your hearts. Impress them on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. Tie them as a symbol on your hands and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorframes of your houses and on your gates. And if you've been to a Jewish home, they take that literally. And if you've seen some of the, I want to say it's Hasidic, but I could be wrong. They actually have the scrolls on, like, I think it's on their hats, or on, it is literally up against their heads. And so they've taken it very literal, but I don't personally believe that was the way it was supposed to be. But what God's saying to them is like, hey, these are the things, I mean, PK says it all the time. The things we talk about are the things we're always going to talk about, right? It's that you have those conversations over and over again.
It's honestly one of the stupidest things parents can say when, as it relates to their children and a relationship with God or church. And I understand where it comes from, but if you really know what God put you on the earth to do as it pertains to your children, it is very stupid. When parents say, well, I just want them to kind of figure out God for themselves, or I want them, if they don't want to go to church, I don't want to make them.
Right.
It's not what Scripture says.
No, it's no, absolutely not.
Right. And teach them, impress it upon them, right? They're God's children, and He's letting you raise them.
Yeah.
You need to teach them to serve God.
Yeah, and there's so much of that thought process. There's this like self-parenting philosophy where it's like, well, the kids will guide, parent-led parenting is what I think it's called, or child-led parenting is what it's called.
The stupidest thing ever.
Right. And that, in like, maybe if we were raising a bunch of eagles and like they had all these innate instincts, and even then the eagle still needs the mother for a little while. That to me is such a backwards. If the parent, if the kid knew what to do, why did God put them with you?
Eagles don't do child-led parenting. The eagle would stay in the nest.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, they throw them out.
Mother eagle says it's time for you to fly.
Yeah, because if you start, I mean, that's how we get some of this madness that you get, where like, oh, you can just determine your own gender and you can you can identify as whatever you want. It's because you don't have these parents that understand that it's their role and responsibility to lead these kids. I mean, that's why God gave them to you, is because you're supposed to be the one that is showing them what's right, showing them who God is, like helping them develop their skills. And we're going to get into more responsibilities.
But so just to summarize and zoom out a little bit on steward, right? Steward is to turn it into more. That's your responsibility.
Yes, very good.
It doesn't belong to you, and you're supposed to do something with it. So as your children grow up, you need to help them produce, help them be more capable.
Yeah, and this is your coach. Like we said, this is your coach side. Now, the next thing is a servant. And I love this because we said this is more to nurture. And when I think about who's more of a natural nurturer, typically in the husband-wife relationship, it's usually more of the wife. And what I love about that is, I mean, we covered this in marriage, that there's things that God's put you together that you could never birth on your own. The obvious one is a kid. It takes like the collective reflection of God's character between a man and a woman to really raise a child and to the fullness that God designed. And so in the servant, G, you want to talk a little bit about some of the specifics of that?
Yeah, so that doesn't mean, and my mom did a great job of like taking care of me and doing stuff for me. But that's not really what I mean about the servant category. Mm-hmm. The way that you serve them is, so this is one of the understandings of what we're called to do with God, is our job is to please God and serve people.
Right.
Right. And so some of the people that you serve the people that God has put in your ministry. And one of those is your children. Right. And so the way that you serve people, like chiefly, is by loving them.
Yes.
So loving your children well and helping them understand who they are as your children and as God's children is going to set them up for so much success in life. When you serve someone, you're preparing them for their work.
Yeah. Very
right.
good.
And so as a parent, when you're loving your children well, you're helping them understand their identity as your child, helping them understand their identity as God's child. That gives them like one of the most important things that they're going to have in life to go on and be mature, and the serving, all of the roles play a part in what the overall purpose is of parenting, which is to mature them and develop them to help them serve the kingdom. The way that serving does that is it helps give your children, the love that you give them helps give your children an identity.
Yeah.
Right. Because my parents loved me. So you guys who know my story, right? Because my parents loved me so well. As I went through SEAL training and they tried to tell me who I was like, no, you don't know. My parents know.
Yeah.
Like, and that sounds stupid to people who don't understand it, but it's so powerful.
So powerful.
That I could deal with, SEAL instructors and they're like, you're this or you're that. I'm like, you don't know.
Well, think about what we had in the survey.
Yeah.
What are people worried about? That your kid's going to have anxiety, which is you focusing on like scenarios that could happen and uncontrollables, and that they're going to get bullied. Guess what? I'm guessing you never got bullied.
Nope.
That must have been lucky. No, because you knew who you were. Because really, if you were going to be kind of weak about it, you'd be like, oh, well, those instructors and those SEALs, they were bullying you. On a schoolyard, that's what they'd call it. And you were just like, yeah, you're wrong. I know who I am. I love that. Don't miss the power of that, because that's massive. And I mean, the part of the serving, we talked about how parenting is not for you. This understanding that you're serving kids, I will say one of the greatest lessons I've learned from you in leadership is that you have to love people the way they need to be loved, which is a servant's mentality. And what does that mean? How do you know what they need, how they need to be loved in the moment? Well, it's having an understanding of who's got the plan. And guess what? It's not us. Like, we are serving them with the understanding that this is a person that God's given to us to develop into more.
Your children may be like you. Your children may be very different from you. If they're like you, it's just a little bit easier for you to understand how to love them. But if your children aren't but even if they are like you, hey, this is what works for you, right? You know what works for you. And so if your children are very similar to you, you're like, hey, I know what'll work on them.
Yeah.
And if your children aren't like you, you're going to try what works on you and be like, oh man, that doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
Right. And so I've got to figure out what works for them, because serving it's not like, you don't serve out of here's what I'm willing to give you.
Yeah.
You serve out of here's what you need.
Right. Because you're serving them not from a place of like, well, you're going to have to go on and take the family name one day and all this wealth I'm going to give you. You're serving them from the understanding that you're there to, like you said, develop a child for God. So, I mean, Psalm 127 verses 3-5 says,
such a great family scripture.
Are a heritage from the Lord, offspring a reward for him. Like arrows in the hands of a warrior are children born in one's youth. Blessed is the man whose quiver is full of them. They will not be put to shame when they contend with their opponents in court. The point being, their heritage from where? From the Lord. And what you just talked about they may be like you or they may not, leads to the next thing that we talked about, which is the leader. And as your leader, your job is to challenge and correct. I think, and Pastor Josh said it when he was on here, that the controversial take he had on parenting was that your kids are a direct reflection of you. Like there's no, I just got... And I agree with that. I think your kids will be the greatest challenge to your leadership, because I've got 3 of them, and I will tell you that they're all different. And I can't parent my middle child the way I parent my oldest or my youngest. I have to adapt, not be like, well, this is who I am and you're going to deal with it. I need to give them what they need in the moment, and I need to give it to them in a way that they can understand. And it constantly forces me to adapt, because I take that thought process that if something is not right with them, that's on me, because I'm the adult. They're a kid. And so it's a huge, huge call as a leader.
So one of the roles you're going to play as a parent is, so we've talked about steward, we've talked about servant, and one of the roles you're going to play is a leader. We talked about this scripture back in biblical masculinity, but it's very relevant here as a leader to your children. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, a man who does not provide for his family is worse than an unbeliever.
Yeah.
But how this relates to leadership is, when you dig into the scripture, the word provide is the Greek word proneo, which means to foresee. So one of the things you're going to do for your children, right, is challenge them, help them see greatness in their life. Really, to provide for your family is to help them see a future.
Yeah.
And then Hebrews 12:7, I'll let you read it, Nick.
Yeah.
But one of the other things that you're doing as a leader is to discipline your children.
Yeah. Yeah, so good. It says, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. What a great example for us to follow. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you're not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you're not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all.
We talked about
That's
this
big,
scripture in Mighty Men a couple months ago, but if you're not disciplined, you're illegitimate children.
Man.
What does that mean? It means that discipline is the tool of a father to shape you into who you're supposed to be.
Yeah, that's
right.
so good.
So as a leader in your family, right, it's not like you just enjoy getting the belt out. That's not what I'm talking about. As a leader in your family, when you see things that aren't right, you say, we have to address this. We have to fix it. Look at the way God disciplined the Israelites all through his time with them. When they screwed up, like God would give them the victory sometimes, even after they screwed up. And then after the victory, he's like, now we're going to deal with this.
Yeah.
Right. You guys didn't learn. And it's not, God's not like, I need you to listen to me so that I feel respected. Like that's a very childish view of God.
Right.
And so it'd be easy to see your parents that way. And because humans can be immature and we can act that way.
Right.
But if you look at the way that God addresses correction, he's not saying like, I'm going to make sure you respect how great I am.
Yeah.
What God is saying is, I'm going to make sure that you don't follow this stupid path again.
Yeah.
Because if I didn't save you from this nonsense, you would have gotten yourself into a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And the Israelites do that over and over again. They continue to make mistakes that lead into trouble. And so discipline is reproof. Discipline is shaping. It's refining. And so as a parent, one of your jobs is to lead, which is to see a future for your children, help them see that future, but also to discipline. When they get off the path, it is a great parent who, right, if you grow up and you learn nothing from your parents, the world will make you pay a heavy price.
Yeah.
If you had good parents, you didn't get by free, but you paid a much cheaper price of discipline. If your parents discipline you well, life is easy for you. If your parents don't discipline you well, life is very hard for you.
Yeah.
And so the whole value of discipline is to help is through that maturing process. Like a lot of discipline is the maturing process. I'm going to refine you. I'm going to shape you. I'm going to help correct your thinking. I'm going to help correct your actions. When you lie to me, there's going to be penalties for it. When you don't do what's asked of you, there's going to be penalties for it. This is a parent inside of a household helping a child learn how to be successful.
Yeah, and I think that this is where what we said earlier, I mean, these roles that we're covering, the 4 roles, there's so much wisdom that comes from understanding the seasons that we talked about earlier. Because if you don't understand that it's your job to help your kid mature, you're going to shy away from the discipline portion. Why? Because it's not fun. Like I've had to spank my son, I don't even know how many times because he's wild. And like, and it's, I hate spanking him. I really hate it. But what I would hate more is to have him go on and
to keep the behavior that
exactly
you're spanking him for.
Because you know what? He's going to have worse pain later, and it's not going to be from someone who loves him.
Yeah.
He's going to get that pain from somewhere because, like you say, you either get humbled or you be humble.
Yeah.
And so, like, this is me at his young age showing him, hey, that's the line, and this is how we're going to give you consequences so that you can develop that humility that's needed. And I think that so many people, when I look at those seasons of protection, maturing, and elevating, I think very few parents get to the elevating stage because they miss the maturing stage. I feel like the protection is put on you automatically. Like you have this kid, they can't feed themselves. You know you need to protect them. And I feel like that whole like we're going to get them to 18 mentality is literally just a protection thought process. And so moving on to the last role, the 4th role that we have in here is friend. And I mean, that's something that in all seasons, it looks different like all these things do. But
and this is like what I said. I know my parents will say it when they come on. Is, one of the greatest gifts and one of the greatest successes as a parent is that your children choose you back.
Yeah.
Because really get to have friendship and relationship with your children. If you are, it doesn't mean you never get to be your kid's friend, but when your kids are little, the amount of time that you wear the friendship hat is a small percentage.
yes, very
Right.
true.
And you've got to have that like leadership hat. You've got to have the stewardship hat, just like on Stan. We can put the friend hat on, but as a kid with a parent, you're probably going to do something pretty quickly that needs to, we need to transition, we need to correct.
Yeah.
Right. And there's times where it's like, hey, I'm just going to let this slide, not because, because I want us to enjoy this moment. Right. And I get that. But you're not going to wear the friend hat very much when your children are little. But if you'll mature your children well, if you'll lead them well, if you'll steward them well, when they get older, they'll be your friend for forever.
Right.
If you do not mature your children well, if you do not lead them well, if you say, hey, just go figure it out, do whatever you want, your children won't respect you and they won't want to be your friend.
Well, and they'll also open themselves up to people who will also treat them like that. I mean, you understand your kids are learning what a friend looks like from you because who's their first play partner? It's you. You're their friend. And the same thing could be said about leadership. You have to display everything that you're going to help bring about in them, which is why it's such a high call for your leadership. The same thing in a friend. When we had kids, I was, I've grown up in locker rooms. I've been around pro sports in my career. And like, I know, gee, you've been in it with the teams. You know what guys are like, man.
Yeah.
And like, I had 2 daughters, and I was like, oh my gosh. I could think of 50 examples off the top of my head of guys that I never want them to be around. And the only bit of wisdom I could discern at this point, I wasn't serving God, was I was like, well, I better treat their mom so good that they're going to learn what that looks like at a young age, so that they'll never be drawn to a loser or to some guy that's not going to treat them well, because I've done such a good job displaying to them how a man treats them through their mother and then also through them. That's why I do things like daddy-daughter dates. Well, it's the same thing with friendship. If you're the type of friend that just like, you can be manipulative, or you just let them get away with whatever, you're not showing them how to treat people. And so it's really important to have that. Now, you may be like, at a young age, I think a lot of it is just about having fun, and you'd be like, oh, okay, is that...
What friendship looks like with younger kids
Yeah.
is, right, like just talk about friendship for a second. You can, in friendship, you can get into a friendship for what can you get out of it.
Yes.
Or you can also be in a friendship of like, I can give to this person.
Yeah.
And as a parent, you need to be in like the give friendship role.
Yep. Big time.
Right? Like show your children what it means to be a good friend by being a good friend to them. When your children are young, if you're being friends with your kids for what you can get out of the friendship with them, not only will you miss it in the stewardship leadership category, but you'll train them to be that same type of friend.
Yeah, that's so good. Well, when it does mature, there's a great scripture, and it's in John 15:15. And I think that this is sort of like when you get to the elevate stage. This is where you're at with your dad. It says, I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends, for everything that I learned from my Father I've made known to you. And what a beautiful picture of friendship
everything
that is.
I've learned from my Father I've made known to you. So essentially, when a father or Christ in this standpoint, because he's fathering those he's discipling, but when a father says like, I've taught you everything I know, right, and you've learned it, you're doing it, that's when it's a great friendship.
Yeah, so good. Well, I'm very much looking forward to the rest of the series. Well. I feel like we've laid the groundwork. I hope that's I hope that's making you think a little bit, because I will tell you, as we always say, it's very hard for people to follow something that they've not seen a template of. And that's why I'm so excited to show your parents to everybody. I really am looking forward to that one, because I just want them to share so much of what makes them great, because I know they've been such a blessing to me and my wife of showing us like how they do things and how they set up family. So I'm looking forward to sharing that because otherwise there's so many people that you're only going to be able to do what you see around you.
Well, parenting is one of those things, like, it's put upon so many of us,
right?
But we don't always have a great template,
right?
So all I will say for the closeout of this episode is you do not want to miss the rest of this series.